Good morning. If you're in the US, this is the IDF's morning brief. It is Monday, July 15th. The multi-front Iranian war against Israel in the Middle East is now 283 days old. I am IDF Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Jonathan Conricus, former IDF spokesperson, international spokesperson, and current Senior Fellow at FDD, filling in for Jonathan Chanzer again, very happily doing so. And Jonathan, I wish you great endeavors. And you're welcome back to the FDD morning brief. Our guest today is a special expert, very knowledgeable in Palestinian and Arab affairs. He is the Palestinian and Arab Affairs Corespondent of Israel's Channel 12 News, which is the most viewed and most influential Israeli TV news station. If anyone has been keeping tabs on Palestinian society in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and a good look at Lebanese society, that is Ohad Hemo. He will be with us and will be sharing his expertise as we analyze recent events in Gaza and how the current situation in Lebanon and Judea and Samaria might influence the continued situation of the war. A short I'd say, statement before we go into the details of today's headlines. The first after-action review conducted by the IDF and signed off on by the IDF Chief of Staff was released last week, and it set into motion a lot of events. It is the first and by no means the last one. We will see an addition or many more after-action reviews coming to light, presented to the Israeli public, to families of the murdered Israelis, whether they were soldiers or civilians. FDD covered it, and I can say that this will be a very challenging time for many Israelis. Heated political debate, military and political are meeting and clashing, and the blame game is very much on, something that our enemies for sure will be paying lots of attention to. And it might be forgotten easily by people that the point of it is to learn and to be better for the future. There's a lot to learn from how the IDF failed on October the 7th, and I think that that FDD will continue to monitor these reports and hopefully make the best of it for the sake of US interest, but also for the sake of the region. With that, a few headlines about the current situation. No surprise that the number one headline is the question: has the mastermind of Hamas's atrocities on October the 7th finally met his maker? We do not know, but perhaps Ohad Hemo, our guest, will have details and insights into it. But on Saturday, for those of you who aren't perhaps aware because of other global news or American news during the weekend, on Saturday, the IDF conducted a strike in the El Mouassi area, an agricultural area in southern Gaza, that may have eliminated Mohammed Deif, the elusive leader of Izzadin al-Qassam brigades, the military part of the terrorist organization Hamas. We don't know, but even if Deif ends up crawling out of the shadows again, like the cockroach that he is, it's still a good achievement because the brigade commander, Rafa Salama, another high-ranking Hamas official, has been confirmed killed in that same strike, and we are waiting for official news from Hamas or from Israel about the fate of Mohammed Deif. He's been on Israel's most wanted list for decades, second only in terms of Hamas to the top terrorist Yahya Sinwar. Shifty figure who has never made a public appearance, and there's only very few pictures of him, despite his high-ranking position within the organization. For over 3 decades, Deif rose through the ranks of Hamas. He has enhanced the capacity from scratch to what it was before October the 7th, was the mastermind behind the October 7 attacks, was a very powerful force behind the suicide bombing campaign against Israeli civilians that Hamas did in the early years of the 2000s. And he, of course, since the attacks of October the 7th, the so-called Al-Aqsa floods, how Hamas calls it, has been hiding and actively directing Hamas combat activities against Israelis, both military and civilian. To no surprise, both the Washington Post, ABC News, and other American outlets have been quoting the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. Some of them, they dub it now local health officials instead of calling it for what it is. And they've been using Hamas figures again when providing details of the results of the attack, specifically the amount of casualties. Hamas, as usual, trying to paint a picture of a mass casualty event of civilians, where we in fact know that the IDF struck an area which was not where refugees or internally displaced people were. It was a Hamas center, or the command center of the Southern Brigade of Khan Yunis, where the brigade commander was, and lots of other terrorists. But the usual blame game is on, and many US outlets are playing along with the Hamas handbook. The second headline, and we will hear more about the first in just a moment with Ohad Hemo. The second headline is actually positive. Argentina is breaking new ground by designating Hamas as a terrorist organization. On July 12th, Argentina made history as the first country in Latin America to designate Hamas as a terrorist organization, including freezing of financial assets. The President Milei's statement referenced to the October 7th attack in Israel, where 7 Argentinian citizens were killed and 15 taken hostage. And of course, he highlighted Hamas's ties with the Iranian regime. For the people in Argentina, the threat of Iran and its proxies is, of course, deeply personal. In 1992, Iranian-backed terrorists bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, killing 29 people and injuring nearly 250 others. The Islamic Republic of Iran also bears responsibility for the 1994 attack on the AMIA Jewish Center in Buenos Aires, the capital, the deadliest terror attack in Argentina's history, which killed 85 people and wounded more than 300. The 30th anniversary of this tragic event will be marked on July 18th, this week. And the quote from the president was that Argentina must again align itself with Western civilization, emphasizing the importance of standing against entities such as Hamas and the Islamic Republic that seek to undermine it. The question remains, and I think that we can give ourselves the answer, will other Latin American countries follow suit? For those with strong anti-Israeli governments and policies, such as Chile, Bolivia, and recently Colombia, each of these countries severed ties with Israel weeks or months after the October 7 attacks. I think it's unlikely, but we, of course, can continue to hope for positive developments. Last headline. On Friday, 118 United Nations member states publicly declared support for none else than UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. That's the same agency that keeps Palestinians stuck in almost perpetual refugee status, facilitates anti-Semitic education in its schools, and turns a blind eye and even supports and actively aids Hamas and other terrorists. The news surrounding UNRWA, particularly since October 7, has been nothing short of a total mess. News agencies and officials alike have attempted to paint a picture of UNRWA as a misunderstood organization. And the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has even boldly stated that there is no alternative to UNRWA. That is just like saying there's no alternative to Hamas in Gaza. However, the evidence of UNRWA's staff complacency and active involvement in the attacks of the October 7th massacre and its aftermath really is very clear and damning, and it really puts a question mark behind the statements of the Secretary General of the UN. With those 3 headlines in mind, I am now very pleased to introduce Ohad Hemo. Ohad Hemo is the Palestinian and Arab Affairs Corespondent expert of Israeli Channel 12 News. He has been covering the Arab world, specifically Palestinians, but generally the Arab world and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for over 20 years. He is the author of a book in Hebrew called Pnei HaShetach, roughly translated in English to The Lay of the Land, about the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria, and he is also a recipient of the most prestigious awards for journalists in Israel, the Sokolov Award. Ohad has been keeping close tabs on the unfolding situation with Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorists, and I think he is very well suited to answer our questions. I'm happy that he agreed to be on FDD's morning brief. Welcome, Ohad.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Good morning, America. Good evening, Israel. Hi.
Shalom, Ohad. And I'll just tell everybody that when I thought who I would want to invite to this episode of the FDD's Morning Brief, you came to mind because a few months ago I finished reading the book. And when I asked myself who would best be suited to actually tell the story and actually give an or track the sense or the pulse of Palestinian society, your name came to mind first, and I'm very happy that we're on here together. Let's start with the most burning question that everybody has, and I would be very interested in hearing your take on it. Do you think that Mohammed Deif is indeed dead? If he is dead, and let's hope he is, what would that mean for Hamas in Gaza?
Yes, first and foremost, thank you very much for everything, Jonathan. I'm very happy, honored, pleased to be here today talking to you, sharing a little bit of my knowledge, experience in the Palestinian arena. Mentioning Mohammed Deif, definitely one of the most, maybe the most important person in Hamas in Gaza Strip. And Hamas is keeping a fog around its around its fate. We don't really know what happens there. Not as previous events before. Now, this time, there were two statements of two Hamas seniors that rushed and said that Mohammed Deif is alive. Does he alive? I'm not sure, really. What we know that right now in Khan Yunis, in the Mawasi, when you just mentioned Jonathan, Hamas is unearthing, is exposing a lot of bodies of people that were buried in this attack. I can tell you that there are dozens of Hamas members. A lot of them were taking part of the 7th of October massacre, and these people now are alive. We still don't know if Mohammed Deif was there. I'm not sure, but maybe we will never know, or definitely for the next future. Now, I can tell you that Mohammed Deif is a legend. He's a myth. We're talking about a person that we used to sit for 33 years underground, literally. He is the most wanted Palestinian ever since 1991 in this case. He's an object of admiration. If I'm thinking of the demonstration in the Arab world, in the West Bank, in Jordan, Egypt, wherever, always the name is Mohammed Deif. Exactly. It's not Sinwar, it's nobody else but Mohammed Deif. And why is it so important for Hamas? Because this guy, years ago, took these sporadic, I would say, guerrilla units and created from this kind of semi-army. Some would say even kind of an army. Now, I can compare him, for me, is like Imad Murnia in Hezbollah, or like Qasem Soleimani in the Revolutionary Iranian Guards. It's the same thing. We're talking about a major person that took this organization and created something which is much more dominant and stronger. Now, if his absence would make three, for me, as I understand, three very important aspects. First, I'm not sure how much he really managed to conduct the fighting on the ground. I'm talking about the last 9 months. But I know that he had a great role in the rehabilitation of Hamas after the war. And this guy, as he just built Hamas, he should have been rebuilt it again after the war. So his absence is very important for in this case. The other thing is moral. I mean, we're talking about guiding spirit of Hamas in a way. This is the guy. And 20, 30,000 Hamas terrorists that are right now in Gaza Strip, maybe a little bit less since the war began. Yes, we're talking about 12,000 people that were killed from Hamas up to the IDF. So these guys consider Mohammed Deif as the founder, as the father. And the other thing, which maybe should be the first and most important thing, is the negotiation. His absence definitely will affect the negotiation in a way that this guy is very radical. He's like Yahya Sinwar, very radical in Hamas. He's messianic in a way. I would say that he's this guy that is one of the architects of the 7th of October. You know, in the act of the 7th of October, Mohammed Deif really believed that this is the beginning of the end of the state of Israel. It's not that used to be like a small tactical offense. No, not at all. We're talking about a guy that really believed that Israel should be disappear and will disappear in his own life. So his absence will affect dramatically, as far as I understand, on the negotiation between Israel and Hamas. Just one last thing. He was very close to the Iranians. I can tell you that Israel tried to assassinate him 7 times. I think that the 5th time, after he was injured very seriously, very badly, he was smuggled, and that's what I was told in Gaza Strip. He was smuggled through one of the smuggling tunnels under Rafah. He arrived to Sinai, and from there to Iran, and there he had this treatment and went back after few months. He went back to Gaza Strip. He had a very strong ties with the Iranians.
Definitely influential then on a tactical, operational, and strategic level for now and for the future. Really brings it into light how important this strike was and what collateral damage, so to speak, could be relevant in order to take this terrorist out. Now, if we segue from that to the general situation of Hamas, if you could perhaps describe the current political and military situation, regardless of Mohammed Deif, if he's alive or if he isn't, but the current situation for Hamas in Gaza specifically, and if you want in Judea and Samaria, how strong is local support for Hamas, and what do you make of the videos that were released probably by Hamas with the public floggings and beatings and spray painting on the backs of Palestinians who were seeking food by what appears to be masked Hamas members? What do you make of those, and how indicative are they of the situation?
So it's very, very good question, because we are not really sure. We are a little bit confused. And I can tell you that what happens these days in Gaza Strip, there is kind of a contradiction. Because according to testimonies that we get, I can tell you that on a daily basis, I make a lot of phone calls from people in Gaza Strip, the majority, of course, in southern Gaza, or today in central Gaza Strip. And everybody reflects or describe an anarchy and a chaos. And this is kind of new phenomena that we didn't see 3, 4, 5 months ago. Now, I can tell you that a week ago, I've been to Gaza, I've been to Philadelphia axis. I made this, it's the 2nd time since the war began that I could really talk to Palestinians from Gaza, inside Gaza Strip. First time was in Shifa Hospital. And I was talking to these guys, some of them was lorries drivers. And they described me an unbelievable reality in Gaza Strip, in which today they can't see Hamas. They say Hamas is not there. We can see looters, a lot of looters, thieves, as you just mentioned, this video that Hamas that was published by Hamas. We see the thieves everywhere. You know, the lorry drivers that deliver the humanitarian aid from Kerem Shalom towards inside Gaza Strip. They told me we are so afraid to make this route, this path, because everywhere, each one of us was robbed so many times. And until 6 months ago, we could see Hamas. Hamas really, they've been there. They were in a way they were making us having this path like peacefully. Not today. Today we are all alone. The anarchy is everywhere. We cannot see Hamas. That's what these phone calls that I make in Gaza Strip, I get the same thing. I can tell you that there's a lot of humanitarian aid today that are in the storerooms, because nobody's really can divide it in a peaceful way.
Yeah,
distribute, of course, right? The crime rate in Gaza Strip increased dramatically during the last few months. I can tell you that people are cursing Hamas publicly. It's something that until few months ago you would have almost died if you made it, and today you can find it in the videos almost everywhere. For me, it a little bit in a way reminds Iraq and what happened in Iraq after the American invasion there. On the other hand, and this is quite interesting, Hamas is there. They're not they didn't disappear. They're there. They became part of the population, mainly in central Gaza Strip. These people really have today this, they make a war of survival. What they want is to survive. I can tell you that Hamas, for instance, there's a big combat units of Hamas that was not being part of the war until today, because what Hamas is doing is keeping them to the day after the war. They want these guys to take over Gaza again. So I can tell you that we're talking about some hundreds, very like Nukhba members of Hamas that until today they didn't find any IDF, they didn't fight the IDF, nothing. They're just waiting, sitting and waiting, because one of the most important things for Hamas, exactly, is to take over Gaza again. Are they popular? I can say that the majority of the people in Gaza Strip are against Hamas. And this is something that made me very frustrated, because when I talk to people in Gaza, when I make even footage with people, I raise my camera, I hear people that are really against Hamas. I'm not sure if the world really understands what's going on inside the sentiment of the annual average people in Gaza Strip. What's the problem? The problem is that there isn't any alternative. I can tell you that today, for instance, Hamas is recruiting, some would say thousands, some would say hundreds of new members. My sources in Gaza tells me that they see 14, 15 years old Palestinian children with AK-47 or RPGs that were recruited by Hamas just lately. They're not Hamas members, but they're being recruited by Hamas. Why? Because they want food, because they want supply, because the only people that
their families are sending them. Yeah,
their families are sending them. They're doing by themselves, voluntarily, whatever. But anyway, these are, the only address today, until today, in Gaza Strip is Hamas, and this is one of the most problematic things that happens. One last thing about this, I can tell you that there was an attempt, very not successful attempt, combined by Israel and by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, to create a new reality in Gaza Strip. We're not really mentioning this, but in northern Gaza Strip, there was an attempt of the IDF on the one side and the PA, the Palestinian Authority, on the other side, that had this cooperation to create a new reality without Hamas, and they failed. They failed because Hamas is very strong until today, as far as I understand, in Gaza Strip.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is underreported and underthought of. Specifically, the last part, which I think is worth speaking about more. We are short of time, so we have time for one question. I have many more questions, and I think that our viewers would benefit a lot from it, but we are limited in terms of time. You mentioned Philadelphia and the Rafah corridor, the strategic asset of Gaza, the way in and out of everything illegal. How likely do you think, it's in the headlines now and people are thinking about it, how likely do you think that it will be that Israel will hang on to the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah area after the main fighting ends? And what do you think that the reasons or the pros and cons would be for such a thing to happen?
I can tell you that it's one of the $100 million questions. 100. Pay attention. Why? Because this right now, or this week, the Shin Bet, the head of the Shin Bet was in Egypt. They're talking. There's an Israeli envoy, and right now they're talking with the Egyptians about what's going on and what will be in the border between Israel, or between Gaza and Sinai. And I've heard that they promise us, everybody promised, that even though if Israel will withdraw from Philadelphia axis, we will have these cameras and these eyes, and we will know exactly what's going on there. And I just remembered that after the war of 2014, and now I'm talking only security, okay? After the war of 2014, the IDF, or of some parts, okay, of the IDF, they promised as well. They said, we know exactly where the cement goes and where the iron goes, but they didn't. This is a problem. Whenever you're not there, you cannot control anything. And this project, this tunnel project, that I just mentioned that I've been to Philadelphia this week, and I've seen tunnels. Listen to me carefully. It's unbelievable. I've seen tunnels, smuggling tunnels from Sinai to Gaza Strip, 20 meters far from the border, under the eyes of the Egyptians army. Egyptian soldiers. I mean, I could see them, I could see the tunnels in one side, 20, 30 meters, that's it. You cannot really make this thing without the knowledge of the other side. Now, the Egyptian, yeah, the allies of Israel, we know everything. But if Israel, and I'm talking security, really wants to make sure that this project that Hamas made in Gaza Strip, like we knew, I mean, the oxygen hose of Hamas was this border. And if Israel want to make sure that in the future we will not see Hamas again raising, so it has to take control of this axis. But on the other side, if we want any agreement for the day after the war, it makes, I mean, Israel should be obligated to leave the Philadelphia axis. And I just thank God that I'm not the Prime Minister of Israel, because this is such a difficult dilemma, really.
It sounds like a catch-22 of strategic proportions.
It is.
I happen to be in agreement with you of how you assess it. Ohad, we could talk for much longer, and something tells me that we'll talk again. Thank you very much for your expertise, your time, your insights, and for sharing it with us.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you for being on the morning brief.
Thank you very much.
Okay, here is what FDD has on tap for everybody today. Chief Executive Mark Dubovitz and Senior Fellow Yaakov Nagel have a new piece, both in Hebrew in Ma'ariv and in English in the Jerusalem Post, highlighting the Iran Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's ultimate stated goal, which is to destroy Israel by the year 2040. And they mean business with their plan. They note, Dubovitz and Nagel note, that the Islamic Republic is actually implementing it, a comprehensive plan to destroy Israel. They argue that it is long past due that Jerusalem and Washington get serious about taking steps to topple this brutal regime. It's a very interesting piece, and I recommend you read it. Number two, the dynamic duo of FDD's Mark Gerecht and Ray Takei penned a piece for the Wall Street Journal on Iran's newly elected president. It is titled Meet the New Boss, Same as the Old Boss, where they formidably challenge the international media spin about Iran's new president and make very clear that while Masoud Pezeshkian may present himself as a more reform-minded person, the international community should not be fooled into thinking anyone other than the supreme leader is pulling the strings in Tehran. And finally, Tyler Stapleton and Boris Zilberman published a piece in the National Interest, timed with the NATO summit in Washington, D.C., highlighting the spoiler role played by the so-called ally, Turkey. They run through the anti-American, anti-Israeli, and anti-Western rap sheet of President Erdogan and make recommendations of how to strengthen NATO and hold him to account for his actions. That's it. That's another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. For those of you who do not yet know, the long-form content is all available on our website, fdd.org. We are on X, Twitter, at FDD. And of course, we have a very organized YouTube channel with all of the latest statements and media presentations by the various excellent experts at FDD. And I suggest you give it a look and find interesting content there. See you on Wednesday, where we will have Iran expert and Israeli journalist Amir Bar Shalom to talk about strategic issues, the state of the Iranian regime, and their nuclear endeavors. See you then.